So hey guys, it's a nice evening out here and I thought I'd go ahead and start working on these 944 heads that I have. You can see this one here looks to be pretty straight, but we're going to make sure that it is. We're going to be measuring the valve guide clearance, we're going to be measuring the valve seats, and basically just cleaning these valves up and making sure they're not bent also, because looks can be deceiving. And on this head here you can see that it has 4 bent exhaust valves. I'm just going to go ahead and clean this head up as well and replace all the valves on it, and of course we'll be replacing anything else we come across as we go. You can see that I have all the tools laid out here and all the parts that I'm going to be swapping in, such as valve stem seals. I have enough for both heads. I also have some guides here, and I have my feeler gauge. We have some Prussian blue so that way we can verify that the valves on this head are straight. We also have some layout fluid here, and what that's going to do is allow us to measure the valve seats to make sure that they are in spec. And we have our feeler gauge that's going to give us, along with this straight edge, an idea whether or not these heads are warped. If they are, we're going to be taking them to the machine shop to be decked. And I have a brass brush here that I'm going to be using to clean these heads up. You can use steel as well. I got some SOS pads because I want to really get in there, clean everything up, and a little razor or scraper here that I'm going to use to remove all that gasket material. And you know, I've got the workshop manual and the Haynes manual. Both of these I've cross-referenced and they have the same specs in them, so we're good to go on that. You just want to get some shop towels and some gloves just to keep stuff off your hands, because we will be using some valve lapping compound and the valve lapping set here, and you really don't want to get all this stuff all over your hands. And you can see that I have a dial gauge here, and we're going to be measuring our valve guides with that. So let's get started. Alright guys, the first thing I'm going to do is remove the valves and remove the springs, and we'll start cleaning the heads in this tub here. And you're going to want some valve spring compressors like this and a long stem magnet. Alright, I now have all the valves out of this first head here, and I have them all lined up here with their appropriate springs and keepers, so that way they can go back exactly how they were. I'm going to take this head and we're going to wash it in this tub with some degreaser. We're going to be removing all the gasket material and all the carbon buildup. So alright, this is the head that came off that white 924S, and I just wanted to show you here the cardboard gasket that was on here. But anyway, now it's time to get all this off, and I've got a little razor scraper, and if you're just careful enough, you can just use it to, you want to get it at the right angle. You can see that I'm almost holding it flush down here, and I'm just letting it peel up that RTV. See how beautifully it's doing that? And if you're just careful, you're not going to nick or gouge your aluminum. So alright guys, today we're in the shop, and so far I've got everything laid out here that we're going to need. I also got that head cleaned up last night and it looks pretty good. First we're going to be verifying that the head is straight, and to do that you're going to want a straight edge and a feeler gauge. Next we're going to be making sure that the valves are straight, because I do intend to reuse the valves on this project. To do that you're going to want some Prussian blue here, and I'll show you how to do that. Next we're going to be making sure that the valve guides are within spec, and I have my dial indicator here for that. And then afterwards we're going to be making sure that the valve seats are within spec and lapping the valves, and I've got some layout fluid for that. and some lapping compound and some lapping tools. And once everything is lapped and everything is verified to be within spec using our Haynes manual here, we're going to be changing our valve stem seals and putting everything back together. Alright guys, the first thing I'm going to be doing here is checking that this head isn't warped. If it is warped, I'll take it to the machine shop and have it decked. If you'd like to try this at home, all you need is a feeler gauge set to 1/800 of a millimeter and a straight edge. So the first thing we're going to do is take this straight edge and lay it across the cylinder head like this and just see if the feeler gauge slides through. If not, you want to move to another position like so, and you want to go through about 10 different spots on the head and then come across it like this. But otherwise, I think I'm pretty happy with the results there. And I can't turn it this way because I'll hit my tripod, so I thought I would use this. You can see there. Yes, everything's excellent. So I think it's safe to say that this head is straight. And now we're going to be verifying that our valves are straight. So next we're going to be checking that our valves are straight, and in order to do that, you want to go ahead and get these old valve stem seals off here. Next we're going to be using this Prussian blue here to verify that our valves are straight. And I'll show you how this works. Go ahead and open it up. Go around the edge of your valve like so. And you don't want to turn the valve or anything. You want to just stick it in like that and then pull it straight out. Alright, as you can see here, we have a blue ring all the way around the seat that is telling us that this valve is indeed straight and fully seating. So now I'll go ahead and do the rest of the valves to make sure that they're straight as well. So alright, if all your valves are straight, you're going to have a head that looks something like this, with blue rings all the way around the valve seats. Then you can just come back and wipe it all out. So alright guys, now that we know that our valves are straight, the next thing we're going to be inspecting is the valve guides themselves. You can see here that all mine are at the same height, and that's what you want to see. You don't want to see any drop down in there because that could indicate something more serious. Now what I'm going to be doing here is measuring the clearance of the valve guides themselves. Now there are several ways to do this, but I'm going to do the way that the factory service manual specifies and the way that the Haynes manual states as well. So I have my dial indicator set up here. Now you can do this test from either the top or the bottom. You just need to make sure that the valve isn't seated. Now I have my dial indicator set to 0 with a little bit of pretension on it. And here is the maximum clearance that we're going to want from a valve guide, and that is 31/100 of an inch, or about 0.8 of a millimeter. Now we're just going to take the valve stem and rock it back and forth. And you can see we're well within the 0.8 of a millimeter clearance. Alright, my valve guides look pretty good. They all seem to be wearing uniformly. So now I'm going to turn this head over and we're going to start lapping the valves. So now I'm going to start lapping the valves, but first I'm going to put some layout fluid in the seats. So that way when I finish lapping, we can measure the width. So now that we have the layout fluid in the valve seats, the next thing we're going to do is put some valve lapping compound on the back side of our valves and then work it in with our valve lapping tools here. So the first thing I'm going to do here is take this shop towel that I've soaked with oil and rub it on the stem, so that way it will keep the valve guide lubricated during this process. Now I'm going to take a little bit of my lapping compound and put it on the tip of my finger and just sort of work it on there just like we did the Prussian blue. And you want to make sure that you do not get any of this stuff on the stem itself. And now we're going to insert it into our seat. So what you want to do is take your tool and stick it to the front of your valve, give it moderate pressure, and then work it back and forth like you're warming your hands. When it gets quiet, then you can go ahead and just pull the valve out. Again, you want to make sure that you don't get any of that compound on the stem itself. So alright, here is the seat after lapping, and the metal exposed is what the valve was touching, and we will be measuring this to make sure that it is within spec. First I thought I would come down here and show you the valve. Now you want to take this and spin it around to make sure that this little line going around the bottom here is completely uniform, or you may have a bent valve. So alright, our valves are now lapped. Now you can see that there is some metal exposed where the layout fluid was, and that is the area that was actually touching the seat. We're going to be measuring that and making sure that it's within spec. Now as I mentioned, you want to just work the valve back and forth, sort of like you're warming your hands. You don't want to work it longer than 30 seconds, and you'll actually start out with a crunchy sound, and it should get quieter and smoother as you keep working it, and that's when you'll stop. If you still have pitting left behind afterwards, you may need to have the seats recut. Alright guys, next we're going to be measuring our valve seats using a caliper. As you can see that there is an exposed area between the layout fluid that the valves cut as you were lapping them. That's what we're going to be measuring. The first ones I'm going to be measuring are the intake valves. We're looking for about 1.77 millimeters, give or take 0.2 of a millimeter. And this is why you do not want to overwork the valve seats when you're lapping, because if you get these out of spec, you're going to have to recut them. Alright. All of our intake valves are good. Next we're going to measure the exhaust valves, and we're looking for 2 millimeters, give or take 0.2 of a millimeter. So I have it set to 2 millimeters. This one is perfect. That one as well. That one too. And there you go. So alright, now that we have our valve seats measured, the next thing we're going to be measuring is the valve margin. I don't know if you can see it here, but it is a very small margin just below this lapping line here. and goes to the edge of the valve there. It needs to be at least 1/32 of an inch. Any smaller than that and you're going to have to replace the valve, which is all the more reason that you do not want to overwork the valves when you're lapping them. Before going any further, I'm going to take this head and these valves outside and shoot them with some brake clean to get all that lapping compound off. So alright, we now have our heads and our valves cleaned. The last thing we need to do before we start putting everything back together is check the squareness of the springs. What I have here is my number 1 intake valve springs, and I'm just going to take this apart like this and set it aside. Now I'm going to use this here and this hard metal surface to verify that the springs are square, and as you can see, they are perfect. Now you do not want to reuse springs that are bent. You're going to be asking for trouble doing that. They can break, so you always need to make sure that they are square, and we're just going to go through and keep track of all the springs and make sure that they're all square, and then we're ready to put this back together. So now that we've checked our valve springs for squareness, we're going to start putting this head back together. First, I'm going to check my valve guides one last time and make sure there are any defects or burrs down in there. If there are, I would use a burr removal tool to get those out of there, or you may need to take them to the machine shop and they can remove them for you, or they may need to replace the guide altogether. But I always like to check and make sure that everything's good, and everything looks fine to me. So I'm going to start by putting my valve stem seals on. And I'm just going to place them on like this for now, and then I'll come back with a tool and push them down. So I have a 13mm socket here, and I'm going to use this to push the valve stem seals on. You can see that it just goes inside and it sits on that metal shoulder there. Now that we have the valve stem seals installed, we're going to go ahead and start installing the valves. Alright, the head is now back together. So alright guys, I'm glad to have this head back together. It's nice knowing that the head is straight, the valves are straight, the valve seats are good, and everything else is within spec. So I originally intended to make this a very long episode where I fix both of these heads, but it turns out none of my valve spring compressors, including this one that I've rented, is strong enough to remove these bent valves. So I'm going to have to get one before I can make that episode. But until then guys, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.